This is Ellie Hasken from Encounters Podcast, and you're listening to the Monster Guys Podcast.
Reptilians, the Illuminati, UFOs, and laser gun-toting goblins from Kentucky. That's what we have for you tonight, and much more with part 2 of our conversation with Ellie Hasken of Encounters Podcast. Stay tuned. Welcome to another episode of the Monster Guys Podcast. I'm DC. Michael, tonight we're going to finish our conversation with Ellie Hasken of Encounters Cast. Now, many of you may remember back in September, Strange September, on the Monster Guys Podcast, we had a conversation with her, and we got into some really weird stuff. We're talking aliens. We've never talked about aliens on the Monster Guys Podcast. Aliens, conspiracy theories, one world governments, laser gun-toting goblins in a 4-hour shootout with cowboys in Kentucky. I mean, it was just a wild time.
Well, and don't forget, perhaps most bizarrely, the Denver airport, surprisingly enough.
Yes, the Denver airport. How can I forget? We'll actually be visiting that, I think, sometime in 2018 with Ellie and hopefully Jesse, the team over at Encounters Cast. So also later this month, stay tuned because we're going to have a chat with Jesse. We got Ellie, now we're going to get Jesse and get the real gossip that's going on behind the scenes on their podcast.
That'll be fun. I think he specializes more on the secretive side, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's a smart guy. He's not as boisterous as Ellie. Is that a nice thing to say?
She's very energetic, so he's more
she
reserved.
Is very energetic. Ellie is going to track me down and beat me up now. So.
She's going to shoot you with a laser gun.
She's going to shoot me with a goblin laser gun.
From MUFON.
From MUFON. Yeah, so it's a really fun conversation that we've had with her already. Part 2 is even crazier, and I can't wait for you to hear it. So, Michael, let's jump right in. Talk with Ellie and get into some more really, I'm talking weird stuff to the level of Justin Bieber.
That is a first for the Monster Guys Podcast.
That is a first for the Monster Guys Podcast. You'll also have some exclusive content that she shares with us that she hasn't even talked about on our own show. So you guys strap in. We're taking off right now. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with Eleanor Hasken of Encounters Podcast. I'm sure everybody remembers back in September, Strange September on the Monster Guys Podcast, we interviewed Ellie and it was just out of this world. Literally, figuratively, and literally. So, and punnily. And we just had a great conversation. Eleanor, it's great to have you back. How are things going? How's school? Is the world still together up there?
The world is still together. Things are going very, very well. It feels way later in the year than it is, which is a very odd experience. I feel like it's already mid-November.
Yeah.
And it's not.
Well, as of the time that we're recording, it's not, but by the time people hear this, it will be. So it's just kind of a time warp. People will be catching up with us at that point.
I know, but the problem is by the time people are listening to this, I'll feel like it's like mid-January.
Yeah.
So I'll be just always a little bit ahead of everyone, I think.
It just seems to be that's how life is these days. So I don't know. We've got to catch up somehow. Let's review just a little bit, because when we talked to you before, you laid out a classification of aliens that are believed to possibly be in existence or among us, or however people want to take that. And we talked a little bit about MUFON, but we started to get into more conversation about lizard people, human hybrid experiment, and we've got a lot of other things to trail off with that. But kind of review for us real quickly the 4 classifications that you talked about, and let's go from there.
Yeah, so the 4 classifications that we discussed were the Nordic aliens, which are very tall, very blonde, beautiful, gorgeous specimens. They look really humanoid, except just bigger and more beautiful than us, essentially. Then there's the very tall grays, and those are thought to be more scientific. They're called like the scientists of the alien species. And then there's the shorter grays, which are thought to be sort of like a slave race almost. They work for many of the other species of aliens, and they're sort of involved in abduction phenomena more broadly as the abductors themselves. And then there are the reptilians, which I think is where we ended last time, really just getting into the reptilians. And those aliens are sort of fraught with a lot of different categories, but they are most commonly associated as this really aggressive, mean species who are coming to Earth for insidious reasons, either to create human-alien hybrids, to mine our Earth for our resources, to mine humanity for our genetic resources. You name it, pretty much they are kind of the instigators of all negative things onto humans. So yeah, it's a very brief little overview.
Yeah, very good. We did kind of leave off with reptilians as far as the classifications. We also touched on this mind-boggling 4-hour gunfight with laser guns between humans and aliens that took place with goblins coming out of caves, and oh my gosh, my head's been reeling around that whole story ever since.
I can vouch for
It's
DC.
so good, right?
He's been not obsessed, but he's been going on about it for a little while after reading up on it.
I immediately began reading up on it, and I looked up the festival. I was pulling out photographs and old articles and documentation, more recent events that have happened with that. This dude sitting on a fence that got jumped by one of these goblins. I mean, it just goes on.
I actually don't know that one.
Yeah,
oh my gosh, that's new.
And there's a photo, and the problem is the photo is the day after. So it's like the newspaper, I guess, told the guy, hey, point at the fence where it happened. So you just see the guy pointing at a fence, and I'm like zooming in on the photo looking for a goblin on the roof, and I'm like, please let there be something in the background.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so good. I had no idea. Clearly, I have to go back and re-up my Kelly, Kentucky alien gunfight. You know, actually, for literal years, my trivia team name for bar trivia was Alien Gunfight, and literally no one ever got it.
Oh my gosh.
But we on the team knew. We were like, we are repping Kentucky Pride in a way that no one else can possibly understand.
That's awesome. So let's pick up there. Let's start with the reptilians. What else do we need to know? Because these are, and I think we mentioned this in the last show that we did with you, that these are the ones you kind of see out there on YouTube and videos and, Hollywood celebrities and politicians, that there are all these reptilians that are, taking over in this new world order type of thing, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
What do we need to know about reptilians?
Yeah, as we discussed last time, the reptilians are a very broad category. And what I mean when I say that is that people attach a lot of different stuff onto them. And it's kind of hard to suss out what is really, quote, going on, right? There are some people who believe that they are a subterranean. The word just left my brain. They're coming from out of the earth onto us. So they're not extraterrestrial. They're very much terrestrial. They're more terrestrial than we are. Then there are some people who believe that they are coming from a solar system outside of our own, and that fits more into the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And people from both camps have belief systems that integrate the reptilians into our government, into our celebrity pop culture, as a method of control. And I think that's really fascinating. To me, it's really fascinating to think about how people who have very different sets of beliefs in terms of where these species are coming from can still see them both as doing the same thing. And that thing is trying to control us for their ends. And as I mentioned last time, this poll about conspiracy theories and what people believe, and sort of the shocking thing out of this poll is that 12 million Americans believe reptilians are running our government. But of course, we complicated that, right, by thinking about, the other things that people were polled on, like the JFK assassination. And in comparison, the reptilian belief was actually a lot lower, but it's still very much present. We can't ignore that 12 million people believe this. I'm losing the script a little bit. I'm going to come back around to it.
No, that's fine.
So when we think about what reptilians could gain from controlling our government, or even our celebrity pop culture, which is elevated to the status of government through talking about reptilians as inhabiting humans, or inhabiting human lives. When we think about the role of celebrities in American culture, we think a lot about how some people know more about what's going on with celebrities than they do about what's going on in the White House, or they care more about what's going on with celebrities than they do at the White House. So thinking about reptilians controlling our celebrities is equally as important as them controlling our government in a lot of ways. But most people see it as sort of like a two-prong. They're controlling both the celebrities and our government, and that's sort of like their master controlling plan. So after this famous survey came out, the Atlantic, which I actually really like the Atlantic, but this is something I really disagree with them on. They published a quasi-satirical article wherein they talk about the poll and the beliefs in reptilians, and like many people, they put all of it on David Icke, who I talked about last time. He's
right.
a conspiracy theory author who has really popularized the reptilians as controlling human government and celebrity culture. But he's not the only person who believes in it. But they put a lot of the blame of this belief system on him because he's a really prolific author and he is a really prolific speaker. So he has a lot of speaking engagements. He's very engaged online. He vlogs a lot. So people are sort of using him as a scapegoat for talking about why people believe this, even though for a lot of people they may not be familiar with David Icke. So back to the Atlantic article. The most fascinating thing that they do in the Atlantic article is they set about discussing the common signs of reptilians, and I could go through those if you want, and keeping in mind that they are quasi-satirical, but they're very much, as the Atlantic is using them, but they're still very much based on the people who actually do believe in this.
Yeah,
which I think is fascinating.
Give us those, because I need to know how to recognize if I come in contact. And you know what? It's not difficult to marry the whole celebrity political thing. That's not a big stretch in our world, and we'll get back to that. But give us how to recognize.
And thinking about too, like the celebrity pop culture government tie-in. I mean, now more than ever, we have a celebrity as our president, right? Like someone without a political career history.
Right.
So, and you can directly see sort of the interrelationship between celebrity and government. But yeah.
But wait a second now. And we're not politicians, and we don't get into politics on the Monster Guys podcast because we just don't.
It's easier to stay out of it.
Yeah,
I agree.
but on that point, because this is not politics, this is alien. So there's no way that our president could be a reptilian. First of all, he's not friends with all the others. He's not friends with any of them, and none of them are friends with him, unless it's just a big smoke screen. But, he's got really blonde hair.
I appreciate where you're coming from.
How does that work? I don't know, because the classifications, I'm trying to physically put people in their categories.
In their little boxes. And
I
think
probably shouldn't do that.
Useful.
That's going to get me in trouble, but...
No, I think, I think when we're trying to make these generalizations about belief systems more broadly, it is useful to make classification systems or, put people in boxes, right? Because then you kind of create a schema. And once you have that, it's a lot easier to diverge from it, right? Because you can recognize sort of like, this is a stable system and now we're moving outside of it. So I appreciate where you're going.
Yeah, and I can see it now. I'm going to get all kinds of hate mail on this just by bringing up the topic. Not only am I going to have men in black and goblins on my back porch tonight, I'm going to have protesters and anti-protesters and counter-protest. I'm just going to have the whole lot of them on the back porch. But folks, we're not getting political. I'm not making statements. I'm just talking out loud.
And I think, and I promise I will talk about these classifications, I think what makes thinking about the influence of reptilians and about secret societies in our government so interesting to me is that all of a sudden, even if you're talking about belief systems totally unrelated to the political, right? Like me making a statement, our president was once a pop culture icon. That's true. That's
Right.
not debatable whatsoever.
Right.
But you cross into this line of like, oh no, potentially you've just offended someone. And I think that's really fascinating because you see that in talking about extraterrestrials more broadly too. Like any statement you make at a UFO conference or ufology conference, you run the risk of offending someone there. And I talked about this last time when reptilians were brought up, especially as government controlling entities at the ufology conference in Roswell that I attended over the summer. The panelists were so mad. They were so frustrated. And a huge part of that plays into this idea that now aliens controlling our government, especially as reptilians, has been so villainized by the media, like the Atlantic article I was just talking about, or more broadly by other publication outlets too, that even though previously when I've heard ufologists talk about these things, now because it's part of the popular culture and they see it as making fun of something that they truly work for and believing in, they're totally disavowing it. And I think that's really, really interesting. But classifications. Okay. So, common signs, predominance of green or hazel eyes that change colors like a chameleon, but also blue eyes. So we sort of have every eye color but brown.
As the reptilians.
As a reptilian.
And this is coming from the article from the Atlantic.
Yes.
Okay.
This is coming from the article from the Atlantic, and they're drawing this from David Icke's publication.
Oh, okay.
True red or reddish hair. So people with red hair. Even though, as I'm going to bring up in a second, one of the most popular celebrity reptilian discussions is about Justin Bieber, who has neither red or reddish hair. Low blood pressure, which would be very hard to find other people. Like, I think you would have to really do some digging to find out if other people have low blood pressure.
Wow.
Keen sight or hearing. ESP. UFO connections. This is one of my favorites. A love of space and science.
Well, we just took out like 75% of the population.
I know, right? I mean, it's it's very much a very broad generalization. Deep compassion for the fate of mankind. So I think that's interesting because it puts more of like a positivist spin on it. Unexplained scars on the body. Capability to disrupt electrical appliances and, quote, alien contacts. So those are just some of the signs. But barring sort of like the true red, reddish hair, eye color, low blood pressure situation, a lot of these are the same signs that you would have for alien abductees or experiencers, right? So you have people who've been abducted by aliens. They frequently have unexplained scars or wounds on their bodies. They frequently have the capability to disrupt electrical appliances, and this is often associated with people who have been part of the alien-human hybrid program or who are being abducted for scientific reasoning. The deep compassion for the fate of mankind, you see that a lot too, because, for example, people who've been abducted by Nordic aliens, they are frequently given visions or prophecies of the future. And when they return to our planet, then they will try and dispel that information. So you sort of have like this compassion for the fate of humankind. ESP that's also frequently given from people who have had contact with aliens will almost always feel some sort of extrasensory perception upon returning to Earth. So I think it's a really tricky situation to get into these classifications because people who would definitely not consider themselves reptilians would probably have a lot of signs of reptilians, right?
Yeah,
anyway.
I mean, my first thought when you started going off about all the hair colors and stuff, I'm thinking hair dye.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, even scars, and then some of the other stuff. I mean, can't we say, hey, that could easily fall into self-fulfilling prophecy type categories? I mean,
definitely.
There's so much.
Definitely.
That's a very odd list.
It really is, and I think, and again, keeping in mind our source, you know, the Atlantic is definitely trying to poke fun at this concept more generally, and a lot of that, again, not trying to be political, but the sort of the rub of talking about reptilians is they are used to talk about politics, but the Atlantic is definitely trying to kind of dismantle what they see as a problematic connection between something that can't be true and the actual reality of human experience.
Wait a second. Is this an attempt to cover up by way of bringing attention to something through satire? Is that what we're dealing with?
Potentially.
Okay.
Potentially, right? No, I think if one were to believe the Men in Black or governmental conspiracies against trying to protect us from the alien reality, this would 100% fall into that category. And there are people in the comment section of this article who bring that up. So, I think that's important to acknowledge, even in a slightly humorous way, too.
Definitely.
But, yeah, when we think about reptilians, that is the primary thing that we think about. But sort of to kind of transition into thinking about the New World Order and how reptilians play into that. Actually, wait, let me pivot for a second. I want to talk about Justin Bieber as a reptilian before I forget. Is that okay?
Yes, we need to do that.
Okay.
I knew there was a reason.
Great. So, this was from earlier this year, and when it was happening, it was so fascinating. And I'm so excited that I get to talk about it because I did not get to talk about it on the episode of the podcast that Jesse and I discussed reptilians on. So this is a Monster Guys exclusive, if you will.
This is really awesome. And let me just say to all of our listeners, did you ever think we would talk about Justin Bieber on the Monster Guys podcast? This is high-level stuff right here you're getting in 2017.
Yeah, we're really about to just break it open for everyone. I'm pretty amped about it. Okay, so on March 15th, 2017, or in spring of 2017, Justin Bieber was completing a world tour. And Justin Bieber's world tours have accrued notoriety previously. A few years ago, he famously brought a monkey to Germany. I don't know if you all knew about this or followed it at the time, but it was unreal. He bought a pet monkey in the States, flew it into Germany, and Germany was like, you can't bring this monkey here.
Yeah.
So he just left it in Germany.
What? I remember that.
Yeah, and and he got a lot of hate for it because he just adopted this pet essentially and then abandoned it. So his tours are not without events, is my point. So this year, the major event was at an Australian concert. Fans claimed that he turned into a giant reptile right in front of them. And this came about internationally because of an article that was published on the website perthnow.com.au, and it was taken down almost immediately. The story went up and it was taken down. And the site that it was published on has kind of been fraught with claims of being provokers of conspiracy theories in the past. Regardless of that, when this article was up, it blew up, right? People went absolutely crazy for it. And at the time, they published videos from that concert. They've all now been taken down, which, again, we could say is a government conspiracy to cover up. But this is the Australian government, not the American government. Except if we think about the New World Order, all governments are one government.
Yeah, right.
I will get there in a moment. But with this, hundreds of tweets came up about, how the video evidence has been taken down, or people tweeting at him saying here's an example. I heard you're a reptile. How did you go out with a human like Selena Gomez for so long then, huh? I love your songs, though. So, people were pretty ambivalent towards it all happening in the first place, which I love. But there are video examples that people have dug up now from when he was arrested in Miami. They've got a video of him blinking, and then how reptiles have the double set of eyelids, then those eyelids blinking closed.
Right.
So you can watch that if you go to YouTube. But because of this 2017 experience, there were so many articles about how he is actually a reptilian and, quote, how this caused mass panic, close quote. And I just love that. I love this idea that Justin Bieber is actually a reptilian overlord or reptilian elite or reptilian kind of lackey. And he just accidentally slipped into his reptilian form while performing on stage. Just had a little goof him up, and now everyone knows. I don't know, I just really like that narrative for some reason.
Wow, that is totally fascinating. I've got to wonder, with the thousands upon thousands of people at that concert, do we have any photos or videos?
I think most of them have been taken down.
How do we control that many thousands of photos and videos for a guy turning into a reptile?
It's interesting because he is just one of hundreds of celebrities who are called reptilians. And yet this one is the one that most of the videos, if not all, I haven't done a thorough search, have been taken down for, right? So if you want to think about governmental control and conspiracy theories, this is such a great example because the one time that it could potentially be true, everything's been taken off YouTube or Facebook. And those websites are seen, for the most part, as perpetrators of, this larger agenda, which gets complex. But yeah,
very
it's really
complex,
interesting.
and I never thought that I would say that a Justin Bieber conversation would get complex, but it's just, I mean, it's
pretty
getting
crazy, right?
it's getting deep right now. But we're not talking about just Justin Bieber. We're talking about
No.
Katy Perry. We're talking about, I mean, and there's a whole trend among celebrities and especially among musicians that's been going on for a little bit, and I think it's getting really strong, maybe peaking, but this whole reemergence thing with artists kind of changing their look and their style and their sound to reemerge as something else. You know, Taylor Swift just did it when she pulled all of her social media. Everything online was scrubbed, and then she starts over with this serpent video that then becomes this whole reemergence. Fergie is doing it. This may not even be widely known yet because I think it just popped up this week, but Fergie's doing it, the whole serpent thing, the religious thing, the alien cult thing is in a very big portion of this new video she just released.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and she's talking about, you know, her reemergence as an artist for being away for so long. And then she's going even, I think, a step further, whereas, you know, some of these other people are just saying, hey, we'll put up a little video, we'll write new songs, we'll change our clothes and our makeup, and we'll get nasty and all this kind of stuff. Fergie's whole marketing scheme around this is that this is not just a musical experience, but this is a visual experience. And that's what they're actually saying. This is a foray into the visual. And it's very striking if you watch it. And I'm sure you're going to go right out and watch it today.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm sure
I
somewhere
think,
in there we can find reptilian theories going on too.
Oh, I don't think we have to go very far at all. And I think, so part of the dialogue about the reptilians, for some people, particularly David Icke, who I keep coming back to, is that what happens is people may gain notoriety as a celebrity, and then when the reptilians realize that they're a threat to their agenda, then that person will be taken out and replaced with a new reptilian. And that person, the reptilian will be a clone of that person. And most of the time, this comes about as a rebirth, as you're talking about. And the new reptilian will often hide symbols of their reptilian background in their music videos. So I think, you know, I haven't admittedly done any research on the new Taylor Swift and the new Fergie, which I'm just learning about and really excited about. But I am.
Listen,
already.
I am totally into it, and you and I can have a conversation. Because here's the thing: Miley is upset with Taylor because she's no longer angry with Katy, and now there's a new beef between Taylor and Kanye, and that's going down. And it all started happening around the MTV Music Awards, and now Fergie's coming out. Listen, I'm into it. If you want to go, listen.
You're in the know.
We can break this stuff down. I am pop culture magnate right here.
You know, if the reptilian elite are controlling our minds through pop culture, it sounds like you are a victim, man. I feel like you gotta unplug a little.
No. I'm not a victim. I'm an expert. I know what's going on.
So you're trying to learn the enemy's sides. Right?
I am totally on it. Michael, there's one thing that we're safe about, and that is that nobody will ever consider the Monster Guys podcast a threat to their career. I promise you that. We are in no way.
It's a conspiracy, right?
We are
you never
in
know. You guys could just be really deep in the reptilian agenda.
Yeah, but we are in no way in the line of fire. We have no credibility or concern whatsoever. So let's say, who else is out there is reptilian? We know that Justin Bieber is, obviously. Katy Perry,
Justin Bieber is.
Taylor Swift, Kanye. I'm sure Jay-Z probably is, and Beyonce, and
they both are. Al Roker,
the Obama
he's
administration.
A really famous one.
Who
the Obama administration, actually the George Bush administration, which I wasn't really familiar with, but I'm surprised actually. Certain people within the current Senate, House, and government more broadly are also all reptilians. Really, the Queen is a reptilian of England. All the princes of England are all reptilians. I'm sure Kate Middleton's children are also now reptilians. Really, any person in power, there is some video dismantling them as a reptilian. Hillary Clinton, of course. Michelle Obama is actually one of the most prominent reptilians, interestingly, more so than a lot of other people. Yeah, pretty much anyone is a reptilian.
Anyone and if you take the list from The Atlantic, literally anyone can be a reptilian at this point. because I have a
You know,
scar. I have kind
Yeah.
of reddish brown hair if you look at it in the sunlight. But the problem is though I have brown eyes, so I think I'm out.
See, I too have auburn hair, but my eyes change color depending on the environment. So
Whoa!
clearly, I'm a plant. I know.
What?
That's pretty bad.
We are talking to a reptilian. You are infiltrating.
I mean, how do you guys think I know so much?
You are
Come on.
infiltrating the Monster Guys podcast.
She's
That's
about
what
to
you're
be
doing.
Infiltrating MUFON too.
You're about to infiltrate MUFON and the Monster Guys. Oh my gosh, Eleanor, what are you doing?
You know, I just really feel a strong sense of companionship for my reptilian overlords, and anything I can do to just really continue to move up sounds stellar. So I'm working on it. I'll let you guys know. See, I'm also still aiming for the MUFON star team. I have very lofty goals as a young reptilian humanoid.
Gosh.
I'm working on it. I'll let you guys know how it goes.
You and all your goblins.
Such a good transition.
All right. So, and for those listening, we're having a little bit of fun, but we're not trying to come after anybody by any means. We're just
no.
This can be fun. Okay. So if you guys are getting upset, just calm down, relax. It's okay.
Yeah, and I think humor is such a good way to talk about these really challenging concepts, and folklorists recognize humor as like one of the most important ways that people release steam, right? So it's called like a steam valve theory, and I don't want to go into it necessarily here, but I think it's great to laugh about this stuff sometimes because you can believe in it and it can still be funny.
We have to, or we'll go crazy.
We have so many people that as soon as this topic is brought up, or as soon as other similar controversial topics are brought up, the room is divided between two very heated sides almost immediately. Or 3 or 4 or 5 sides.
and as we sort of talked about last time too, if this comes up when I'm teaching, right? So anything comes up. Like, for example, next week and the week after, I'm giving lectures on Mothman on campus. And I will bet you all both right now that as soon as I'm done and as soon as I open the floor to questions, the first question will be, do you believe in this? And it will have so much stank on it. And that one person, what they're trying to do is credential themselves as a rational human being.
Yes.
And something that Jesse and I talk about all the time on our podcast is that these beliefs are not without rationale. People who believe in them are very rational. They have proof. They have evidence. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that because they're not, you know, quote unquote crazy, right? They have ideas that may be foreign to us or things we don't like hearing or things that we might think are a little silly. But they're very rational beliefs. And I think as long as you acknowledge that, you can have a little fun in talking about them. But anyway, that's
absolutely.
All.
So let's transition before we go, because I tell you folks, we've just cracked the lid on this. We're going to talk about Flatwoods Monster and shadow people here for a second. But Ellie, before we crack that box open, let's just kind of take a breather for a second. What does this say about humanity? What all this stuff, these aliens, the theories on reptilians and the heated discussions, what does this say about the human race?
I think that's such a good question, and it's one that folklorists are really trying to answer, and no one really has a super satisfactory answer for it yet. But I think, you know, just taking it all at face value and not and being really general about it, because you can get really specific about these kind of things, as we've already proven. I think people are still looking for answers to not only the human existence, but more broadly, like the existence of our planet and how we fit into the universe writ large. So thinking about our Earth as like a very isolated thing gets a little lonely. And I think people, even if they have belief in religion or a faith of some sort, because there are a lot of people who are Christian and believe in UFOs and aliens too. I think there is some comfort about thinking about other species who are out there and who are interested in us and want to be involved in us. And comfort, I guess, is the wrong word, because then we have these reptilians, right, who are trying to harm us.
Right.
Or get something from us. But at the same time, it goes back to this idea that we're not alone and we are part of a larger plan, so to speak, right? And I think that's really comforting for people to think about, because it makes it seem like there's more to just this life. But again, that's a really simplistic answer, and I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with that or find complications with that. And I think that's good, because I think talking about these stories and putting them in context with one another is meant to challenge both us and the stories themselves, right? I think that only through being confronted with something different than what we believe in, we can really grow as people. And I think these stories help us do that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I just listened to a conversation with 3 men this week, and I totally agree with the statement that came out of it, is that we have to have these conversations. Mm-hmm. No matter how taboo they are, we have to learn how to have a conversation with somebody once again. There's logic, there's debate, there are rules, there are ways to do this civilly, and people aren't doing that. They're getting emotional and in an uproar, but as a society, we have to have just normal conversation about these really abnormal topics, and then just let that conversation go, if for no other reason, just to let the steam out. Because if it stays pent up, we all know that it causes way too many more problems that are uncontrollable once those problems rear up their ugly heads. But just having a conversation about it opens up the breathing room and lets us be human again.
It really does. And I think that's such a good point and way to think about it, too. I think the more that people get comfortable with discomfort, I think the happier we will be as a civilization.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's hard.
All right, so let's make people uncomfortable again. So let's
do it.
Let's go back to abnormal conversation. Michael, you had some thoughts from our previous conversation about Flatwoods monster and shadow people. So, Michael, what are you thinking along those lines in relation to all of this?
Listening to the classifications, I kind of wondered where Flatwoods monster fits into all of this. It's a topic that comes up from time to time. It's one of my favorite instances, and it's kind of a small instance in and of itself. There's a lot that happened on that day that a few people have gone back and researched, but the Flatwoods monster itself is almost just one encounter that's very bizarre and very vivid for the witnesses at that time.
Yeah, the Flatwoods monster, I think, is a really interesting example because people have a lot of different ways of classifying it, just like they have a lot of different ways of talking about the Kelly Hopkins encounter in Kentucky, right? So it's either UFOs or aliens or it's goblins, right? And you see the same thing with the Flatwoods monster. So I've heard multiple theories, and I have one that's my favorite, which I'll talk about last. The one I've heard most often is that it is a tall gray in like some kind of costume, because sometimes their clothing will change. So that's most frequently what I've heard, because some of the features of the Flatwoods monster are quasi-similar to a gray, and so it sort of is just this idea that perceptually it was misconstrued as a gray. So that's the first thing, but that's not my favorite one, because my favorite one makes everything a little more complex. So the Flatwoods monster, it's for people who have not seen the Flatwoods monster, right? It's like it's got like a skirt and like a little bodice thing and like a little belt thing with like these long arms with like very tender like fingers, and kind of like two ways it's been described as like a spade shaped head, or there's like a clothing item or like some kind of accessory item behind its head that makes it look spade shaped. I have heard people from Appalachia talk about the Flatwoods monster, which was sighted in 1952, as the Mothman, with the wings pulled back so that the tip of the wings made the spade shape that's above the head. Because like the Mothman, the Flatwoods monster has glowing red eyes, sort of a very profound presence, and like long arms. So that's my favorite one. And the Mothman sort of defies all these categories, because people have a lot of different beliefs about the Mothman, which I'm more than happy to go into, but yeah.
Well, we've talked briefly on both. I think it's funny, I mentioned this theory for the Mothman in passing, and I think, DC, you made fun of it a little bit just because it was so strange and bizarre in the context that we were talking about.
What? Me?
At the time. One of the theories on the Mothman and similar creatures like Owlman and others that you find across the world is that they are remnants of the Atlantis human and animal hybrid programs, which ties in a lot.
This is the first time I've heard that.
Yeah,
that is fascinating.
Ties in a lot to abductions and the alien human hybrid stories you have going on there. So
no, definitely, because the Atlantis phenomenon is frequently thought to be an alien colony on Earth, and part of the reason that we can't trace it or can't find it is that the thinking is actually like an interdimensional transfer where it went back to its other dimension.
Well,
so I think that's really fascinating.
I always ask myself, did it sink or did it go up? Because you also have a lot of stuff going on right now, a lot of news, if you will, about things happening or things being found in the Antarctic being possibly tied to Atlantis. So it's all a very strange web right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think our understanding of place, especially in like a historical sense in regards to the like paranormal and supernatural phenomena, is so fascinating. And I would be probably one of the most hype human beings on this earth if we found Atlantis in the Antarctic or Arctic at all. That'd be amazing. Like I am now rooting for that times a billion. Thank you for bringing this to my attention.
Listen, hang out with us and you'll learn everything you need to know about Justin Bieber, Katy Perry, and Atlantis.
That's the kind of diversity I want and I need in my life, I think. So I'm just glad that it's finally happening to me.
Okay, so take us from there to the phenomenon of shadow people, and I want to kind of lump into that. Michael, you brought up the conversation about shadow people, and I want to loosely lump in there because there's all ways to break this apart, but also things like black-eyed children and some of those type of encounters as well. I know that those are separate, Men in Black, shadow people, but we've done a little bit of connecting across the dots on those. How does that fit into this conversation?
Well, Men in Black and shadow people so the early Men in Black encounters, a lot of them had to do with, people waking up in their bedroom and seeing 2 or 3 Men in Black standing over them, watching them sleep. You have similar things with the Greys, of course, and other alien abduction stories. You also have that prominently with shadow people, tied as well to sleep paralysis. But then you have some stories where shadow people seem to take on certain forms like spiders. They'll hover above the bed and start coming down toward the person. And there are some stories where they actually start to, tell the spiders to go away or have these conversations with them, and the spiders will morph as a shadow person spider thing into an alien standing right there talking to them. So there's this belief in the community that some shadow people encounters are actually the beginnings of an alien abduction. And leading from that back to the whole alien hybrid thing, a lot of people, again, believe that I am not a big fan of black-eyed kids. I think they're a cool story, but I haven't seen a whole lot of legitimacy to a lot of the stories out there. There are a few that really stand out as, ooh, that's spooky and seems to be well documented. A couple of them, though, are suggested to be human-alien hybrid children, basically. So all of that jumbled mess, what would you throw shadow people into as far as alien classifications and how they fit in with things such as the New World Order?
Yeah, that's a lot. So
break that one down, Professor.
Yeah, I think you have brought up some really awesome points, Michael. And I think to start with the shadow people, because actually, wait, I'm going to start with the last thing you said and then move back in time. So the black-eyed children, I've heard those as part of 2 traditions. The first is sort of the demonic possession / spectral phenomena, and then the secondary is the UFO phenomena. But most frequently, I think they come across in the UFO, right, as results of the human-alien hybrid program, specifically not the one with the Reptilians, but the one with the Greys. So that's most frequently where you hear it, where people who will see black-eyed children are typically in spacecraft. And you read about a lot of abductees who have this experience where they'll be in a spacecraft during an abduction and they will see children with big black eyes, and those children will claim to be theirs as a result of the breeding program. So
pretty
that's
creepy.
Just very creepy. And when you think about what the black-eyed children look like they are almost always described as having larger than normal eyes and just really docile features. Almost a lot of them are described as not really having any noses. That's terrifying. And I think if I came across a child who claimed to be mine and looked like that, I'd probably be like, ooh, I don't know about this one. So that's the first thing. So that's kind of where those fit in the classification. But I think shadow people are really interesting because you talked about how they are frequently belong to the tradition of sleep paralysis. So in folklore, there's a really prominent folklorist named David Hufford who talks about the old hag, which is most frequently associated with sleep paralysis with hypnagogic hallucinations, which are hallucinations you have while falling asleep, wherein people will see either a presence in the bedroom or feel a weight on their chest or feel as though something, like they can't move or something has happened to them. And for a lot of people, while it may be an old woman, it's more frequently a shadow person, right? It's sort of this entity that they can't quite describe. It's it's hovering on the edge of their eyesight. They can't really see it, but it sort of has a human form, except that human form is all black. And it's really terrifying, actually, because a lot of times the eyes will be a different color, like they'll be yellow or they'll be red, or they won't have eyes, which, going back to the black-eyed children, that's scary. That's so scary. And to feel as though you can't move is even scarier. But going back to what you're saying about how people will have memories wherein these things will transform into aliens, and how does that tie into this? So one of the most prominent beliefs in the ufology community, which again is like UFO, study of UFOs, ufology community, is that the people who have memories of seeing shadow people in their sleep, it's actually aliens who have wiped the memory of the physical form of the alien and have tried to make it more appealing in a human form. Or our mind is just trying to fill in the gap, and that's kind of what it comes up with. So for most people who have these memories, the form itself is actually a gray alien, as you said, right? And it's almost always the really small one. I think that was mostly what Whitley Strieber, most of his abductions were the small grays taking him away. And you see that for a lot of people, like Stan Romanek, who we talked about last time too. His abductees are mostly small gray aliens as well. So yeah, I think here again we see kind of like this idea of a grunt race or like a slavery race coming back in and interacting with the human mind in a way wherein shadow people become categorized as aliens. Aliens become categorized as shadow people. There we go. Had that backwards. But I think that's really interesting to bring up because it brings up the idea of like the human mind and how we perceive and interpret these events that happen to us in the night. And it's pretty frightening to think about any experience that you may have, albeit with a spider or an alien or a shadow person, where you can't move and you're sort of struggled to physically react to it. Have either of you all seen the film Lights Out?
Yes.
Yeah, that movie messed me up because of that, right? So Diana, right? That's the entity's name in it.
I believe so.
Yeah, she was sort of like a shadow person, right?
Yeah.
Except it's a different kind of tradition for it. And now that I've talked about that, tonight I'm not going to be able to sleep. So that's good.
Well, to talk a second on the implication of that, because as you're saying, the old hag tradition, that's found all over the world. Every culture has sort of their own old hag, whether it's a black cat or it's the old version of vampires, which were just energy balls floating around, or the Japanese fox
my favorite
spirit.
is the bloody ball that rolls around.
Yeah,
That's a vampire tradition from Ukraine. I love that. Anyway, go on, sorry.
As well as the vampiric watermelon that also does the same thing.
Yeah, and the corn, the flying corn. Oh my god, it's so
it gets
good.
Weird.
Anyway,
guys, you have no idea what you were getting into with today's podcast, did you?
But the implication of that, if we're saying that there's a possibility that it's aliens, that our minds are just filling in the blanks, that goes back all throughout history.
Yeah, and that ties into the ancient alien hypothesis too, right? Where the whole human race is just the seed of alien intervention, and they have been here since the dawn of humanity. And I think that kind of goes back to like the religious aspect, right? Where people are searching for kind of answers. Yet I think like disavowing it from the religious aspect and thinking only about the implications of that, it's really scary. And folklore, I already mentioned David Hufford. I really, really recommend reading his book. It's called The Terror That Comes in the Night, and it's all about old hag. So he used to work at Memorial University of Newfoundland, where he was working in the archives, and he kept coming across the same stories of people who would wake up in the middle of the night and they would experience something in the room. And he found that in Newfoundland, it was called the old hag or the witch, right? And then as he did more research, he found out that it was a global phenomenon. So the book is him trying to differentiate where we get the story from. And eventually what he comes to is two theories. One that's cultural source hypothesis. So it's the idea that people who are having these experiences are having them because they have heard about it in culture and are just trying to kind of make it work for them. You know, they're using these narratives that have been created in culture and applying it to their own experiences. And the second is experiential source phenomena, which means that they're having these experiences and the only way to talk about it is like this. And that's why we see so many of the same narratives.
Right.
And in the end, he leads us mostly with experiential source phenomenon and says, like, people who have this are having this, often without seeing it in culture first. And we can't ignore that. And I think that's really powerful to think about because you have an academic giving total credence to this in a really great way. And the book is really amazing. I really recommend reading it.
That's always been a fascinating topic to me specifically. And you almost have that happening in a different modern day context where people are reading more and more about sleep paralysis and things that cause sleep paralysis. So I feel like more and more people are just blaming all of those experiences based on that. Whereas some of the experiences may not always fit into that specific reason. So it's almost like sleep paralysis is the new old hag.
Yeah, and for David Hufford, he makes them very much the same. So he calls it sleep paralysis with hypnagogic hallucinations, but he just kind of turns it to old hag in terms of what the people he worked with called it. Have you guys seen? So by the time this comes out, this will be very old news. But have you all read about Dear David yet?
Yes, actually. I was just...
Yeah.
It's the guy on Twitter I was telling you about.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And so there, just as a little recap for listeners who may have missed it, is a person is having supernatural or paranormal experiences in his apartment that began with sleep paralysis, right? So he starts by having a dream, like waking up from sleep and feeling as though there's someone in the room and seeing someone in the room with him. And then it moves back into the dream state, right, where he's given this order to not ask the individual who he's seeing in his sleep 3 questions. And then what does he do? He does that. And then in the real world, he starts having responses to this in the physical world. So, like, for example, his cats start behaving oddly. He starts having weird experiences outside of his home. Stuff starts moving in his house when he's not there.
He wakes up
and
with
it's
bruises.
pretty horrifying to think about the real-life implications of interacting with entities that you may see in your sleep or experience in the dream state. And this is actually, so I mentioned this a few minutes ago, but Jesse and I are recording a new episode of Encounters today that will be all about the old hag. And that will come out next week in the time we are recording this. So by the time people are listening to this, if you are interested in a folkloristic analysis of the old hag, please go listen to that episode of Encounters, which will be a few weeks old at that point.
I'm going to say again, I think listening to your show is a must.
Thank you.
Even though so far I haven't heard that we have covered a lot of the same material, it's almost like our shows are connected at that level of folkloric analysis and, you know, picking it apart for its influence and repercussions on modern society. If you're listening, you definitely need to go check out Encounters podcast. And I can't wait for that episode to come out. I'm going to be tearing that up.
Thanks.
I think this goes back to a conversation that Michael and I have regularly, and especially this year with the shows that we've done this year, is that there's a lot of stuff going on out there. You know, we've covered everything from Sasquatch and Dogman to Flatwoods monsters to infrasound to, you know, all kinds of stuff in folklore, now to aliens. There's a lot out there, and it's pretty overwhelming if you don't have these conversations and break it down. But one thing I keep coming back to is that people are having very real experiences of something. And I think that's the importance of having the conversation, not being afraid to open up the boxes, because if you don't, these things just overwhelm people and start to mess with their heads and their hearts and their emotions. Yeah. So I think people are having very real experiences. What they are, I don't know that we can ever have those answers, but the fact is that people are going through things, and we need to, I think, at least from our perspective, talking about it and laughing about it can help. Analyzing it from your perspective, how you break things down is helpful. So, and I would say to our listeners, you know, most of our listeners are very respectful and, you know, are open to conversation, but I would just encourage everybody truly be respectful of people next to you and be open, if for no other reason, to allow people to open up that Steam button, because you don't want them to keep that stuff in. And whether you agree with them or you don't, or you think they're nuts or they're not, just let people open up. And in the context of our modern society, with all the pressures and the stresses of what people are living through, we don't need this stuff staying pent up inside.
Do you mind if I get just a little folkloristic for a moment? Is that okay?
Oh, please do.
For you to.
Okay, great. So going off of what you were just talking about, DC, I think this is something that Jesse and I bring up a lot on our podcast, and I want to introduce it here for your listeners. In folkloristics, there is a couple terms that are really important for narrative studies, right? And narrative studies just means the study of story and how people communicate with one another through story. And that's mainly what I do, as I'm a narrative and a belief scholar. And one of the terms is available narrative. And that is the idea that for every human being who has a story, the reason they're able to talk about that story is that they've heard a story similar to it, right? They've heard somewhere, someone talk about a story in the same way that they can relate their experience to it. And that gives them the ability to tell it. It's called available narrative. And then another term is tellability, and that's the idea that you can tell a story. It's very tellable. And this can be for a myriad of reasons. The first can be your audience is really receptive to the story. It can be you have an available narrative with which to tell your story, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so those are just some examples of reasons why something might be tellable. But then going back to what you were talking about, the third term is untellable, which is just the inverse of tellable, right? So it's the idea that something is untellable because either the audience isn't appropriate, you don't want to tell the story, you don't have an available narrative with which to put your experience upon, or you simply just don't have the words to explain it. And for people who have had experiences with anything supernatural or paranormal, a lot of them think the stories are untellable because a huge portion of the human population has the response like I was talking about earlier, right? Like, do you really believe in this? And if you have an experience and you perceive the people around you as thinking that you are crazy, you're not going to tell that story. It becomes untellable. And then there are also some people who don't have the available narratives to tell that story. So a few minutes ago, we were talking about Old Hag. Some people have never heard of the Old Hag before, right? Like, I have had students, when I teach about the Old Hag, that you see a light bulb go off in their eyes because you realize that they've never heard that story before. And the minute they hear that they're not alone and that other people have that story, they feel so much safer knowing that it's not just them. And then in David Hufford's book, he talks about some people don't know how to talk about it because they don't have an available narrative to work on. Right?
Yeah.
And I think it's so important to recognize the importance of narrative in supernatural and paranormal studies and phenomena, and the importance of what we do, right? So we talk about it, and people who find our podcast are given a space in which they can suspend disbelief, and they can think about the possibility of these things being real and occurring and feel safe in thinking about that. They don't feel necessarily challenged to think that it's stupid, right? They feel as though they're able to talk about it. And I think that's really powerful. And I think something that we do as podcasters is we help give people available narratives to talk about their experiences. I think that's really important. So yeah, there's a little bit of folkloristic theory for everyone on this fine day.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I also believe that applies to what we're seeing in our world today, and especially here in the U.S., but really everywhere, with the protests, the political tension, and the groups of people that are kind of raging against one another. A lot of that kind of stuff happens because people don't have the opportunity or know how to talk about it in a rational, civil way. And I think that's important to realize. We're not just dealing with supernatural monsters, with all this, and I believe it's the beauty of folklore, but we're also dealing with real life monsters and, not people, but experiences and things that people are going through. And we have to talk about it. We have to find a way to talk about it. We have to find those places, like you said, the safety of being in a conversation where we're not looked down upon or degraded or just totally written off. If we don't have those places and those conversations, our society just disintegrates. it's a downward spiral that can't be recovered. So we have to come back to that place of conversation and having, and this is a catchphrase that I don't like, a buzzword that I don't like because of the definition of it, but we have to have safe places to talk through these things and still be able to come out of the other side of it with a disagreement, but not at each other's throats and not throwing fists and, accusations. And I believe this type of thing helps that, and I believe folklore helps that. And so anyway, all that coming from alien-human hybrid experiments.
It's amazing what you can get into, I think.
Yeah, it is.
It really is. Folklore is great, and I think, as your listeners know, it's still very much living, and it's very much with us. It's nice to, not have a negative connotation of it, because so many people do, but it isn't something negative. It's something really powerful and special and beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think it's great, obviously, or else I wouldn't be doing it.
Right. Let me cycle back around, and let's talk about a couple of things that we had on tap. I want you to share with us real quick, because this is fascinating. The human hybrid experiments. And now you've talked about a couple of them, and which really is kind of fracturing my thinking all over again, because here I'm thinking, okay, the aliens have a human hybrid experiment going on. But now you're talking about the Nordics have one, the Greys have one, the Reptilians have one. We've got all kinds of experiments going on.
We do. And for people who live in a world wherein all the species of aliens exist, and that is a thing. Some people only believe in one, some people believe in two, some people believe in all of them. It's a little scary to think about how many people are being abducted by different aliens for human hybrid experiments. It's pretty horrifying, actually, to talk about it. But yeah, so there's a lot of different human hybrid experiments that are taking place in this world that we've been discussing. Yeah, the first is the Nordics. Actually, wait, before I get into this, I do want to say this, and we've talked about this on Encounters before. People have connected fairy traditions in Celtic cultures, like Ireland, for example, to alien human hybrid programs. In that, in fairy traditions, there is a belief that if you wake up and your child is behaving differently, right, they have been replaced by a Styx fairy, and your healthy baby has been taken by the fairies.
Right.
In the human hybrid kind of tradition, there is a thought that it wasn't actually a fairy that replaced your child, but actually a human-alien hybrid. There, too, we see the black-eyed children coming up as a motif in those stories very frequently. So I just wanted to point that connection out, because I think that's really interesting, and it ties back to our conversation of how long have the aliens actually been coming here?
Right.
The Irish traditions date back pretty far. So every different species has an alien human hybrid breeding program to different ends. And the one we hear about the most frequently, at least that I hear about the most frequently, is actually the one with the Greys. And the primary reason for that is, while all the species abduct humans, as we've already discussed, the Greys are thought to be the most prolific of the abductors. And I think part of the reason of that is that they are considered kind of a neutral entity, right? As we talked about last time, and we touched on earlier, they aren't necessarily here for the benevolent reasons that the Nordics are here for, and they're not necessarily here for the malevolent reasons that the Reptilians are here for, but instead they're here to just conduct experiments to figure out why we work the way we do. There are some people who think that they may be interested in attempting to help save humanity. Particularly, some famous abductees have experiences with the Greys where the Greys attempt to educate them on how to save humanity, so that does come up occasionally. For most of the people who are abducted by Greys, they become experiments. So they're the primary people who have implants, and they're the primary people who are inducted into the human-alien hybrid breeding program. And actually, one of the most famous examples of a woman who believes she was part of this hybrid breeding program is actually Betty Hill. And she thinks that her eggs were taken for part of this program. And Kathleen Martin, I think, agrees with that as well. Yes. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm losing the script a little bit here.
That's okay. We're talking about the various human hybrid experiments that are going on.
Okay, found it again.
That's what I'm here for, folks.
And I appreciate it. It's good to be pushed back on track. Sometimes I wish that in my class, my students would help me with that instead of kind of letting me ramble. So I'm glad to have assistance. So that's the Grey human-alien hybrid program is often thought to be the most prolific. And again, if you watch the Stan Romanek documentary that's available on Netflix right now, he talks about how the Greys have been abducting him, and most importantly, how they're reintroducing him to his children. But in his instance, the breeding program that he was involved in isn't necessarily, it's a little confusing because the way that his worked is that he partnered with a female human, but then the aliens changed the genetics afterwards. So the children are technically hybrids, but they're the result of a male-female human parentage, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a little different than a lot of the conceptualizations we have of human-alien hybrid breeding programs, wherein a singular human is abducted and then later off-world, for example, an alien is formed from the genetics taken from that human. But I think, interestingly, we see this in pop culture more than we see it really anywhere else. The X-Files, for example, one of the biggest season arcs is that Scully is abducted and isn't made part of, well, maybe it's a human-alien hybrid program. Maybe it isn't. It might be governmental. We don't really know.
Right.
But that's just a huge plot line for the show and her kind of dealing with that. I can go on, but
yeah, and I think you can also apply this to the conversation and the framework in religion. And the whole thing with the Pope being the Antichrist and what the Catholics are hiding within the Vatican and the full disclosure stuff that we're about to have disclosure that the aliens are going to be shown to be the saviors of mankind. You can go back to Old Testament stuff with angels and demons and fallen angels that are mixing with human women and creating a whole other race. I mean, you can go pop culture, you can go politics, you can go religion.
You can go back to Atlantis. There's a theory the reason
There goes Michael, back to Atlantis again.
It keeps on coming up. There's another theory that the reason that
it keeps coming up because you keep bringing it up. We haven't found Atlantis yet, Michael.
The reason I bring it up is because there is a large theory that the reason it sunk in the first place was because there were two factions there. One that was doing human-alien hybrids, human-animal hybrids, and the other faction was saying, no, this is wrong, you're going to get us in trouble. And because the other side kept on going, they got in trouble, and that's whether it was war or some divine strike, depending on who you follow, that's why the city went down in not flames, but water.
It sounds a lot like conversation with scientists, that scientists are creating this human-animal stuff in their laboratories, and then you got other scientists that are saying, no, you're going to get us in trouble. So what I'm coming away with is that scientists are reptilian from Atlantis, and they're the real problems.
Can we all agree real quick that taking the limiters off of AI is not, like, have they not watched Terminator?
Oh gosh, yeah.
There's so much of that going on right now.
So yeah, the point is that this crosses over so many different lines, and it's just massive. To be honest with you, I foresee an episode with Eleanor, with you, and with Michael on the subject of Atlantis coming soon.
That would be awesome because I feel like it's time for me to really just figure this whole. So I used to be obsessed with Atlantis mostly because of the Disney movie that came out in the mid '90s, which is sort of embarrassing to admit. Wow, that movie was just really compelling to my young self, and I'm so far behind on Atlantis scholarship. I really need to read up.
All right, well, let me bring you up to speed. Okay, there was this place. And it either sunk or it elevated. We don't know that, but we'll figure that out soon. But this is the place where people like Justin Bieber and Fergie... What did I say? Bieber? Justin Bieber and Fergie and Katy Perry and Kanye and the Obamas and the Bushes, they all live there. And they all came from there. Okay. And, when they go home... They don't really go home. They slip through another portal. They go to Atlantis. That's where all the experimentation's taking place. Most of the scientists also live there, and they're all being controlled by probably Justin Bieber. He's probably the High Lord of Reptilians. And from all of that, pretty soon, we're going to find out that the Vatican is actually situated over the top of Atlantis and is going to be the portal from where all disclosure and the salvation of humanity comes from. Am I summing that up? Are you following me so far?
Elliot.
Yeah, I think this is good. I think you need to publish.
Yeah, I'm already on it. Trust me, ebooks are happening right now.
Oh God.
I'm glad you can put up with us.
Yeah, no, this is great. Oh no, I had something I wanted to add to this. We were thinking about. Oh shucks. No, it left me. This is so embarrassing. There was something I was going to say to that whole end, and
about Atlantis or celebrities.
Yeah, it was. Shucks, what was it? It was actually, you know what? Not to toot my own horn, but it was pretty good too. And it's just
dang
gone.
It. Well,
I know. I'm going to think about it at like midnight when I'm staying up because I brought up freaking Lights Out, which will mess me up forever.
Okay, so from there, tell us how, and you may do this briefly on this one because I don't know how deep you want to get into this, but the Illuminati and secret societies.
Yes. Okay. No, this is good. I am into this. First, however, earlier, if you all recall, I mentioned that we set up these really beautiful schemas, and then we can kind of diverge from them to make things really complicated and messy. Can I make things complicated and messy before we go on?
Yeah, because we've been pretty neat so far, so let's...
Okay, good.
Let's scribble it up a little bit.
Okay, so I introduced these four just like very nice, clean categories of aliens, but there are a couple more that don't really fit into any of these boxes and aren't as popular as those four, so they're often forgotten that I'm happy to introduce and make things complicated.
Yes.
Okay, and I know a lot less about these, so I probably won't be able to answer as many questions, but the first and the most important, and actually gaining importance, is the insectoid aliens.
Oh boy.
Which are often described like praying mantises. And those two, you also see small grays as their working people. And the praying mantises, I have heard they are sometimes in conflict with reptilians too. Just like the Nordics are in conflict with the reptilians. But I'm seriously going to admit I don't know too much about the insectoids. They're a relatively new introduction for me, so that's one.
Well, hang on. Let me stop you. First of all, we can learn a lot about insectoids from the Transformers movies.
Oh,
okay.
No, are they in the Transformer movies?
Yeah, they're a huge part. It's very well explained. Those are good. Those movies are good source material for the truth.
Michael Basis on it.
Furthermore, praying mantises, I love them, and I have this fascination with how they seem to be communicating with you while they're like sitting on your hand or something. But to the ultimate end, praying mantises and the insectoids probably will eventually win. Have you ever seen what a female praying mantis does to the male after they mate?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. She goes for it.
All right. There is no surviving that, and there's no reptile that
can
stand with that.
Well, my association with praying mantises, and I feel weird because I've not mentioned this in years, and I've mentioned it twice this week, so it's like, wow, synchronicity is really coming for me. But there is a Godzilla film from the 80s where they're on an island and a praying mantis mutates and becomes giant and starts attacking people. And so that is my association with praying mantises, is that they can destroy you and they will come for you.
Yeah,
and they're giant.
And furthermore, and I'm going to speak from experience, I've actually raised praying mantises and kept them.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so here's one pretty awesome thing about them as well. When they have babies, they don't just have a couple. I mean, they're in the hundreds. And
really?
Oh my gosh. I did all the right things to contain and make sure we were safe and that the babies would be fed. When and her name was Queen Sheba, when Queen Sheba had her babies began to come out of their pod. See, they're aliens. They come out of a pod. They came out in the hundreds, and no amount of preparation saved us because they got out. They got into our hair. They got into our clothes.
You're joking.
We were in public, and people were like, Miss, and they're talking to my wife, and they're like, Miss, you've got like a whole bunch of little green things that are running through your hair. Now, Holly has very long, thick, dark hair. So first of all, they stood out. But once they started getting in, it was over. And so we came back home, and we've got baby praying mantises everywhere. They're all over Michael. They're all over me. They're in our clothes. They're running across computers. Let me tell you something. Praying mantises win at the end of the day. I promise you.
I'm sorry. I know I said lights out is what will give me nightmares. That will give me nightmares. That is the most horrifying story I've ever heard. I have goosebumps right now. Like, no.
I'm gonna send you a praying mantis as a gift to raise your own.
Oh, So thank goodness. Maybe that will conquer my fears and or make me paralyzed and never leave the house. So I don't know. We'll have to see which one that will come about, really.
Okay, so we have Insectoids, and you were going somewhere else with regards to Illuminati. I don't know how that fits, but...
No, I'm coming to Illuminati in a hot second, but I want to introduce one more alien species that will test your all classifications of aliens. There is one particular human, his name is Keowani Laprosidus. Are you all familiar with him? Okay, so he is a fascinating person, and I had the pleasure of seeing him speak a few years ago. Seth Breedlove is not a big fan of his, which you'll see why in a second.
Okay.
He has been communicating with Sasquatch for years and can see them constantly. They are an interdimensional being wherein they can become invisible or visible depending on the person's energy with whom they are interacting with. And Keowani is like one of the chosen people that they are okay interacting with. And the Sasquatch that he communicates with utilizes UFOs and lives in Mount Shasta. So to him, they are the alien species that is inhabiting Mount Shasta, which is a really popular legend cycle. But most importantly, their UFOs are used to travel interdimensionally. And so he frequently goes with them into their dimension, to their home world. And when I saw him a few years ago, he was getting ready to mount a year-long expedition into their home world.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. And so that kind of flies in the face of a lot of Sasquatch and Bigfoot scholarship or squatchers, right? Who think that Bigfoot's very much terrestrial and very much not interdimensional and or an alien species. And yet for Keowani and some other people, it really is. And I think that's a really fun complication to think about too.
Yeah, I don't know if it's fun, but it's definitely a complication.
I think that
just throws it all out the window. Wow.
I know, but I bring that up not so much to upset, but rather to think about kind of how these things interact with one another. And for Keowani, who was speaking at a UFO conference, Bigfoot was very much part of the UFO tradition. And I think that's really fascinating. But I will now turn to the Illuminati, with which that has nothing to do.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so we sort of touched on the Illuminati with regards to the reptilians, in that the reptilians control our government, our celebrities, they control international government, international celebrities, and we've talked about this, but I just want to be really clear. The traditions that we're talking about aren't specific to America, even though we're Americans, so for us, they are. But these exist in other countries as well. And people like David Icke, who see the reptilians as controlling our government and controlling our celebrities, see them as doing this because they are part of a secret organization known as the Illuminati or the New World Order. And there are many conceptualizations of the Illuminati and the New World Order. Some think they are solely human. David Icke obviously thinks they're reptilian. Some people think they're a combination of both. Some people think they're all clones. It really is very expansive. But for the purposes of us talking about it, they are a unified front of reptilian elite or high-powered people who have utilized reptilian clones or reptilian doppelgangers to take control of the world's government for the means of controlling and making people complacent so that they can do nefarious things. And one of those things, according to David Icke, is human sacrifice to appease their bloodlust. That's kind of like his perspective on it. But for other people, the Illuminati want to control us solely just because they want to control the world. It's just the idea of power is very satisfying. But one of my favorite things about the Illuminati that I'm so excited to talk about, that Jesse and I briefly touched on but didn't really get to go into, is their home base. And I love the theories about their home base. And I mentioned this on our last recording, but the number one place in the United States and in the world that's thought to be the home base for the Illuminati is the Denver airport.
Oh my gosh, I remember you talking about that.
Yes, and I just love it so much. I love going to the Denver airport. I just feel like very in touch with world politics when I'm there. I feel as though if I go into the wrong door, I might actually go into an underground bunker and attend a secret meeting. So I'm really, really, really hoping that all this will come to pass someday.
Are there signs on the walls and secret symbols and numbers at different places throughout the airport there?
Yes. I will go through some of them. Another thing before I get into this that I need to mention about the Illuminati or the New World Order is they also have deep ties to Nazism. And again, I don't want to be political, but
right.
It is thought that Hitler didn't actually die and that he has been taken into an underground bunker by the Illuminati and the New World Order to help preserve his legacy and also to just keep him alive. So it's thought that he's helping to run it, so the Illuminati New World Order could also be Nazi agenda. So regardless, I've introduced a lot of theories of who they are and what they do. Regardless of what that is, the takeaway is that they are a nefarious organization, and the Denver airport helps prove this. So the first thing is if you look at an aerial map of the Denver airport, the runways of the airport form a swastika. So that's the first thing. The second is that the dedication stone for the airport itself features imagery from the Masons, and the Masons are often tied to the Illuminati or to the Knights Templar, or really just any secret organization that has potentially more influence than we know. Some people also think that there are underground bunkers that connect the Denver airport to surrounding areas. There are a lot of urban legends about FEMA, which is a relief effort that goes into places that have been hit by a disaster of natural proportions. And a lot of places that are FEMA headquarters are thought to be Illuminati bunkers, so this is one of them. But now we're into the really good ones. There are a bunch of weird murals in the Denver airport, and they are bizarre. I really recommend looking up photos of them. There are some that have men wearing gas masks and holding like AK-47s, and they've got like Nazi era clothing on, and they're just like standing in this mural of like world peace, right? And so some people think that's like a symbolism of this. There's also quotes from people who died in Auschwitz. So again, that's kind of this idea of like connecting it to the Nazis. There's a very frightening horse statue with like blazing red eyes out front that's been nicknamed Lucifer by conspiracy theorists, in part because the sculptor was actually killed by the statue when he was putting it into the airport. That's just a few of the things. There are threads upon threads upon threads of people finding symbols in the Denver airport and then connecting it to the Illuminati, to Nazi locations, to pretty much everything. And one of the things I really, really love is that the Denver airport is sort of tongue-in-cheek about the whole thing. They actually created in the airport last year a art exhibit called Conspiracy Theories Uncovered, where they talk about the conspiracy theories about the airport. And again, if we're talking about people trying to make people feel comfortable and complacent, framing this as a conspiracy theory that can't be true by the person who would be responsible for it is a great way to do that.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating.
That is mind-blowing. You know what? I've been there, but it was kind of a flow-through moment, so I haven't spent a lot of time there, but that's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it is. So a lot of the really good stuff is outside the airport, and I've actually never been to Denver proper. But the reason I was introduced to this is because a good friend of mine is from Denver, and when I was telling him about aliens and UFOs, he told me about it, and I was really skeptical about the relationship between the Denver airport and the Illuminati and kind of aliens more broadly. But holy cow, it is there. It is a thing, and it is amazing. It is so fascinating.
And what's crazy is when people a lot of times speak of the Illuminati and these secret societies, they speak of home base as places like the White House or the Vatican or, somewhere in South America, in a volcano. You don't ever hear anybody talk about the Denver airport.
No, because it's so mundane, right? We don't which is the perfect disguise. It is, right? Because even though so much of what we talked about has been like, these things are just in plain sight, we don't want them to be in plain sight. We want them to be complex. We want the UFOs to be buried underneath Mount Shasta. Because if they are at the Denver airport, right, that throws everything we know and our powers of observation, our powers of rationality, our powers of perceiving the world around us as true and correct. It makes it wrong. It makes us seem like we are just garbage people who are monotonously just wandering around accepting everything, where I don't think humans want to be that. So I think it's really, really interesting to think about.
Well, I think the only place you can go to be more mundane would probably be somewhere like Alabama, but wait. I've been there, and I think... Wait a second. There's some stuff going on there, and I can tell... Okay, we're making some links.
Is that where Atlantis is now?
Well, it's possible that a piece of Atlantis broke off, when it came out of the water and it landed in Alabama.
Okay, that feels right.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. But, I also feel like there's an episode, maybe an on-site live stream episode or an on-site episode that we do together in Denver.
If we could make this happen, I would be the happiest and most contented human being who ever existed.
Whoa.
Ever.
2018 squad goals. Atlantis episode and Denver episode.
Oh my God. Especially if we could do it in front of the mural with the Nazi in the gas mask. That's really all I want. Or in front of the Blue Stallion, really. Blucifer.
Here's a crazy thing. I've actually been in underground bunkers that Hitler built, and
what?
I've been to the Eagle's Nest. I've been in the room where he wrote, or one of the rooms where he wrote Mein Kampf. I've studied that region of the world pretty heavily. I've toured a lot of the places from World War II. It's one of my actual favorite interests historically, and there's some creepy stuff in those areas as well. Yeah, it'll.
So we gotta get you to the Denver airport. We need a man on the ground.
That's right. We're there. We're scheduling this, folks. This is going to happen. All right. So
I hope so.
Let me wrap up with something that is just absolutely non-controversial, because we don't do that. We don't do controversy on the Monster Guys podcast.
Not at all.
With all this stuff that we've talked about, I think I'm just going to spin it all out of control and ask you to share with us. Recently, we had the total eclipse here in the U.S. Okay. And you shared with us about some sightings, and I just want to put these words together. Here's the problem. By the end of the night, I'm not only going to have little green men and the Greys and Men in Black, and I'm going to have representatives from the Denver airport on my back porch standing next to the Men in Black, and I'm also going to have people in government and probably Justin Bieber outside. But this one's really just going to tie it all together. Talk to us about UFOs over the White House.
Yes. First, I have to issue a correction against myself. It was actually over the Capitol building. I apparently enjoyed garbage.
Well, that makes it all safe then.
DC monuments. I know, right? I feel a lot better. At least we're not entering an Independence Day zone. It's more like a yet-to-be-released film wherein the Capitol building gets got by some aliens.
Probably watched Independence Day and we're like, well, we can't do that now.
It's just too cliche now. We have to be better than that. So the solar eclipse was really fascinating for ufologists because on the day of the solar eclipse, there were so many reports of extraterrestrial activity and sightings of UFOs. There were the same lights, for example, were spotted in cities that are over 1,400 miles apart, which is pretty scary if you think about it, because if aliens were planning a mass invasion, maybe the day wherein it was prophesized the world will end would be a good one, right? But the most fascinating of all of them, as you guys have already said, is the one where a UFO shoots past the U.S. Capitol building, not the White House, unfortunately. That would have been a lot better.
That would have been epic.
It would have been really good. If you Google it, it's actually a stream from Fox News where you can see this yellow disc-like object shoot behind the Capitol building at a super fast pace. So knowing that someone caught this is actually pretty impressive because it's really speedy. But there's a pretty good screen capture of it wherein you can see it right next to the Capitol building. And MUFON is the person who screen capped it, and they're just like, oh my gosh, clearly this is happening. And a lot of people, to tie all of our conversations in, they are talking about how the fact that it is at the Capitol is indicative of the government's role in UFOs, because the Capitol building has underground tunnels to all other buildings in the area. So, of course, it would make sense that there's also an underground hangar. And the way this UFO's trajectory is going, it looks like it could be coming out of an underground, bunker type situation. So thinking about aliens and the government, this is a pretty good way to do that.
That is some intense stuff.
It really is.
When you put that in a conversation with a classification of aliens, with Atlantis rising, with the Denver airport, human hybrid experiments, Justin Bieber, reptilians, I don't know where we go from here. I think we just shut down the show and we go to Denver.
I think we all just need to move to Denver and really just start leaning into that investigation.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, folks, you really can't top this conversation with any kind of really snippy closing. So I'm just going to say, Eleanor, thank you so much for all of your insight and your education. I feel like I just need to come sit in your classroom and learn for the next few years.
You're welcome anytime. Please, I would love to have you come as a guest speaker sometime. That would be great.
I'm on whichever plane you say I need to be on. We'll be there. But
no, thank you guys so much for having me. I really, I cannot express how fun this has been. And yeah, you guys have just been amazing and so welcoming and kind. And yeah, it's just been wonderful.
And again, I hope Jesse is feeling better soon, and I can't wait to hear the new episode. Maybe there's a possibility in the near future that we can actually sit down with Jesse, because he has a pretty solid history on the Illuminati and secret societies that's very fascinating, that may be interesting to get into. So when he's feeling better, I would love to chat with him. In the meantime, tell us again where we find out about you and Jesse and Encounters podcast. Tell us all the ways to get in touch with you.
Jesse and I our podcast Encounters can be found pretty much on any streaming service that celebrates podcasts. Just look up Encounters podcast. And as I said last time, we are not the bird watching one. Look for the one with the yellow logo, not the one with the gentleman staring at birds. And you can also find us at our website, which is encounterscast.com. We're also on Facebook, facebook.com/encounterscast, or you can just look up Encounters Podcast. We are also on Twitter, which is a good way to find both my personal Twitter and Jesse's personal Twitter too, at encounters_cast. We couldn't quite claim the Encounters Cast. I forget. I think the bird watching one got it before we did.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a little upsetting. I know. They're just really coming for our brand. Yeah, so those are the best ways to find us. We are going to be doing new episodes bi-weekly this season, so they'll be less frequent than they were last semester, but they'll still be there. Please come check us out. I promise we're nice people. We do get a little quippy with each other sometimes, but we always resolve it.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's a wonderful show. In closing, Ellie, thanks again. And I just want to say to you, be careful when you turn your lights out tonight, because
thank you.
Because the praying mantises will show up and turn into Justin Bieber for you. A lot of praying mantises with the head of Justin Bieber.
Oh no, this is a reality I'm not prepared for.
This was like some Revelation type stuff.
This is epic, end of the world type stuff. All I need you to do is have your phone ready so you can capture the images.
I will do my best, I promise.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.